The Black Ship Side Story. What's the job? Chapter 8. Outside the infirmary, Nico looked through a window at the young boy currently sleeping in bed. He sighed heavily as his mind drifted to old memories once again. As a frown furrowed his brow, he turned his gaze away and continued to walk, satisfied at least that they had managed to save young Wham. But the thought of him turning into the monster he hated the most still left a bad taste in his mouth. Slowly he made his way toward the brig where the rest of the Staples were staying. As the door opened with a swoosh, Winona, Wirt, and Weskel were all up on their feet and pressing themselves against the translucent barrier to see who had entered. Upon seeing the captain, Winona was the first to speak. "My lord!" "Please, tell me how my Wham is doing. Does my boy live?"
"Is Wham alive?"
she asked in a submissive, suppliant tone. From the look of her bloodshot eyes, it was obvious she had been crying. Nico's gaze moved from one Staple to the other, but he found it most difficult to continue staring at Winona. With a slow, deliberate nod, he answered, "Yes. Wham is alive. My associate was able to stabilize him and seal his wounds. He is currently sleeping soundly and should make a full recovery." She nearly collapsed with relief as the words met her ears. Fortunately, Wirt was there to catch her. "Thank you, my lord."
"Thank you,"
she mumbled happily, fresh tears springing from her eyes. But this time, tears of joy. "May we see him, my lord?" Wirt asked a moment later in the same humble, subservient tone he'd used when they met at his home's door. Nico immediately shook his head. "Not at the moment. I want him to rest a little more. However," he paused as he dropped a datapad into a drawer which he promptly slid into their cell. "This will allow you to watch him until you are able to see him yourselves." "And what of us, now that you've kidnapped our family, Lord?" Weskel shot, spitting the last word with the weight of a slur. "Weskel," warned Wirt, turning to his son. "That's enough." Nico's eyes moved back and forth as they spoke before turning to Weskel. "Now we see what my employer wishes to have happen to you. I do believe you should be thanking your lucky stars it was I that captured you, and not any of the others I mentioned, boy." "Would the others have shot my brother, too?" he fired back, not listening to his father at all. "Weskel!" Wirt called again, louder and more firmly. Nico, for his part, allowed the smallest of smiles to tug at the corner of his mouth as he took a few steps closer to Weskel's cell and raised a hand to silence Wirt's warnings. "Touché," he said graciously. "I will say that wasn't supposed to happen. You were supposed to just obey and get into the vehicle peacefully. Not shoot one of my men when he gave you an order to stand down after trying to run away against said orders." Weskel merely glared at Nico while the captain tilted his head at him curiously. "No offense to your father, but I assume that rifle was actually yours, yes?" Weskel's glare turned to one of surprise, but his defiant glare returned a moment later. "Yeah. How did you know that?" Nico shrugged. "Well, after reviewing the footage, I'm going to go out on a limb and say your father hitting my friend was nothing more than a lucky shot. And not even a purposeful one at that. The rifle is almost taller than your brother, and your mother doesn't seem used to or inclined toward anything remotely approaching violence. Whereas you showed an uncharacteristic amount of courage for a commoner not in the auxilia, thus leading me to believe you are the one with the experience." Turning his head back to a normal position, his smile widened. "How did I do?" Weskel's look of defiance slowly shifted to a sort of smiling frown as he nodded silently. "Though one thing still confuses me. Why did you run?" "You had me convinced you were going to listen to my order," he asked, taking turns looking at each of them while waiting for his answer. Wirt now cleared his throat and spoke up. "It was your friend by the vehicle. We saw her from our bedroom window. The Principality isn't really known for our great acceptance of Xenos, and we had never even heard of her kind, much less seen one. So we figured you were lying about being an Aster agent." Nico chuckled while rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, I knew I should have just made her wait in the vehicle. Well done for noticing. And I apologize for the deception. You seem like decent people. It's a shame you have to get caught up in this." As another sigh escaped his lips, he continued, "Anyway, breakfast will be coming around shortly. We weren't sure what you'd like, so I ordered a couple of choices. Till next time, be well." He then spun on the balls of his feet and left the brig. Moments after he left, droids entered carrying trays of food for the family. Bacon, sausage, eggs, potatoes, toast with butter on the side, flapjacks and syrup, bowls of assorted fruits, milk, water, and juice. All were gently placed in the bin and slid through the wall for them to partake. The Staples stared at the presented food with surprise and confusion. None expected such a lavish meal, especially on a ship. Winona wasn't overly hungry and merely hugged the tablet a little tighter before finally ignoring the food, opting to watch her son instead. Weskel's eyes widened as his stomach growled. It didn't take long before he was horking down a bit of everything on his tray. Meanwhile, Wirt set the food for himself and his wife aside as he tried to understand their captor. Not finding much success, he simply shook his head. "Strange man." "Breakfast in bed, Captain?" Myra calls out with an amused grin, pushing off the wall as Nico emerged from the brig. "You never give us breakfast in bed," she teased. Nico smirked. "Shall I throw you in the brig, too? It's rather cozy. You'd miss me in an hour, and you know it." They both shared a soft laugh and soon found themselves walking together when Myra continued. "You haven't contacted the client yet, have you?" "I figure it's best to get the boy patched and fixed up to 100% instead of giving the client damaged goods, don't you think?" asked Nico. Myra raised a dubious eyebrow. "Oh? Why's that? Did the client specify they weren't supposed to have a mark on them?" Nico let out a deep breath through his nose. "No, just said no disintegrations." She barked a quick laugh before immediately stifling it with her hand. "One little disintegration and they never let you live it down, eh?" "Right." "That's what I'm saying," he said with a grin. "Seriously, though, what's going through your head?" "I can tell when you're planning something." "I'm not planning anything per se," Nico defended. "That's a lie," she laughed. "You're always planning something." "I just think there is more to be had here than just our little slice, that's all." "And why would you want to get wrapped up in principality affairs any more than we already have?" "Is it really just about money?" she asked, tilting her head suspiciously. Now it was Nico's turn to raise an eyebrow her way. "You know, for a mercenary, you're not very enterprising. And for a man who trades on his honor, you're awfully casual about changing this deal after it's struck." He stared back at her for a long moment as he thought about what to say. In a cool tone, he said, "That man died a long time ago. And besides, nobody said I wasn't going to keep my word. Maybe just tweak the deal a little in our favor, you know? Never hurts to get a little bonus when the bag is secured." Her lips thinned. "Altering deals is how you end up with enemies who don't send warning shots," Myra sighed. "Look, I just like knowing what I'm getting into." "You know that," she said, nudging his shoulder. "And right now, it's starting to sound like you want to screw over our long-standing client for a shot at revenge." Nico's happy disposition finally began to falter, his smile fading to one of neutral indifference. "You're making me regret ever deciding to tell you about that. And besides, you always knew there was a chance of that happening at some point." She chuckled. "I'm not sure you can count that as a well-thought-out decision, Captain. You were rather drunk that particular evening, as I recall, and I have a good memory." He scoffed lightheartedly and couldn't help but smirk. "I definitely learned my lesson. Don't drink and talk with my first officer." Myra stopped. Her expression turned to one of caring concern. "Just remember, you may have lost your blood family here, but you're not alone. Whatever you decide, you still have us. We're your family now," she said, balling up a fist and gently pushing it into his shoulder. "Don't forget us, Nico." Pulling her fist away, she turned and headed off into another section of the ship, leaving him to watch her as she left. Nico stood there a moment, her words lingering like the aftertaste of strong whiskey. Something he wasn't sure he wanted, but couldn't quite spit out. "Noted, and thanks," he said to himself before heading to his quarters. Moving to his private communications room, the door closed behind as a sound-dampening field went up. Nico closed his eyes for a long moment as he gathered his thoughts together. Finally, he tapped a few buttons on his console and the wall display came to life. The captain cleared his throat. "Guild clearance enabled. Requesting access to the handler. Authentication code SMK C003 CAC. Codename Thistle." A few seconds ticked by before a voice answered, "Good day, Captain. I was wondering how long it would be till we heard from you again." Nico gave a small but respectful bow. "Greetings." There was a pause before the answer. When it came, the voice could be heard clearing its throat. "That's a little curt for you, is it not? How is the assignment progressing? Is everything going well?" He nodded. "Indeed. It is going well," he started, ignoring the initial question. "I don't suspect it will take too much more time for us to complete it. However, I have been giving some thought to our deal." A hesitation on the other end was followed by an almost worried, "Yes?" "Well, you see, I've been doing a fair amount of digging. Necessities of the job and all that, you understand. I've discovered quite a few fascinating tidbits about what's going on out here, and who exactly is involved with the people you have me capturing." Nico stopped to crack his neck, settling in as he continued his thought. "I think I see an opportunity here where I can be of substantially greater help to you while being able to achieve some rather long-term goals of mine." "Those goals being?" the voice asked curiously. "Revenge," Nico replied succinctly. There was a deep sigh on the other end of the line before the person continued. "I'm inclined to say no and order you to complete your mission as our original terms and conditions with the client dictate. However, I also find myself morbidly curious, and they do tend to like it when we show initiative." "What exactly is it you plan to do?" "Well, the way I see it, you have, I'm assuming, the client's side trying to do nothing but bludgeon the other into submission like a caveman," he said with a chuckle. "Perhaps there is a little more nuance than I am perceiving presently, but that is certainly how things are coming across." "I trust you're not accusing me of this?" asked the voice dangerously. "Good heavens, no," Nico said with a small scoff and a winning smile. "Then cut out that grin and stop trying to con me," the handler demanded. Nico retained his smile. "I'm merely bringing up what you once said to me. Calculations are being thrown off because the current plans in place cannot handle them. By my count, they've had two rather publicized attempts to capture Princess Clara, and both have failed spectacularly. Having been here a while, it seems more obvious why that is." He gave a small flourish of his hand as he leaned back in his chair. "Asset mismanagement? Fortunately, I don't even believe it was the client who was responsible for this. I'm fairly certain the problem lies with some of those beneath them. So my question to you is this. Does the client really want to have such a major asset on hand, letting it gather dust until the perfect moment, only to hand it off to a group of people that, so far, have been shown to be incompetently squandering the resources they have so far received?" A low chuckle that Nico knew full well was anything but humorous came across the screen before the person on the other side answered. "Well, of course, who could object to such reasonable words? However, it has also been my experience that revenge tends to make a person lose all sense of objectivity. And sticking your nose too far into the client's business tends to get it chopped off." "Oh? Have I ever let you down?" he asked pointedly. "What happened to the clients who usually value initiative?" Ignoring the questions, the voice continued, now sounding impatient. "You have yet to answer my earlier question. What is it you are proposing to do? Stop wasting my time. Forgive me, but my first thought was making a run on a few old enemies of my family. Weaken them financially, cause some general mischief with promises of information and such. Nothing too terrible or grandiose. Once I'm done, however, how does a coordinated strike on the second princess of the principality sound? Would that balance out the equations?" he finished, crossing his arms across his chest. "And how does making yourself the most unscrupulous individual in the eyes of the princess's forces grant you an audience with her?" the handler asked dubiously. "That's the point of discretion. No noble likes others to know they've been had. I'll be satisfied knowing I've done them harm privately. They'll keep their mouths shut to avoid embarrassment and humiliation. Then I bring in Baron Staples and by extension Princess Clara, using Baron Staples' family as the bait. While I'm handling the transfer, your client sends in their forces to pounce. If the Staples happen to die in the crossfire, oh well, at least then we won't have to worry about them," he finished with a smile as he lied about not caring what happened to the family. "So nothing more than a simple bait and switch. Do you really believe the princess is capable of falling for such a ruse?" Nico shrugged. How else do they plan on making use of these people?
Why should I tell you?
Undeterred, Nico continued, even if he knew he was pushing his limits to the maximum. Look, if they're going to try long-term blackmail, I think they'll find themselves underestimating the target. The handler remained quiet for several long seconds. What makes you believe that? The captain turned his console around for his contact to see. It was a video of Wyatt's knighting ceremony. Wordlessly, Nico let the video play, stopping it the moment the young lieutenant refused to follow any order unconditionally. Right there. What do you see? I see an upstart, pretentious boy who doesn't know who his betters are. Truly? Nico asked incredulously. I see a man who won't be taken advantage of. A man not willing to yield his principles or sense of duty for anything or anyone. Quite a rare trait, don't you agree? You sound like you admire him, accused the voice. The captain smiled. I like to think I take pride in learning my target's weaknesses and strengths. Admire? I think understanding is the word you're looking for. And I'm telling you right now, they will only have one shot at using him to their benefit. I suggest you tell them to make the most of it, especially while I'm in such a good position to execute the plan for them. No answer was immediately forthcoming as Nico stared at the monitor in silence. He was starting to think he may have oversold himself when the voice returned. I will think on your request further and perhaps propose it to the client. Once you have the staples in hand, we can speak again. Till then, do not contact me. Do you understand? He ordered sternly. Nico gave another small but respectful bow of his head. Understood, and immediately the connection died. He sat there staring at the blank screen for a long moment before pounding his hand into the desk once before departing. Convening his crew in their small mess hall, the captain leaned up against the table with his arms folded across his chest. All right, everyone, listen up. We've got some decisions to make. The crew shared a few confused glances, as they weren't too terribly accustomed to Nico calling the group to decide something collectively. The job's done, he started. We can drop these people off, collect our payment, and then return to our cozy sector of space. However, you all know I also have some history here, and more than a few scores to settle. But none of you actually know the full extent of the story. Nobody uttered a syllable. Their captain had always been aloof when it came to his past. The fact that he was talking about it now left them all with a deer-in-the-headlights look. None dared to even breathe too loudly for fear he might change his mind. I was a noble here. A near-permanent guest, if you want to put it politely, he said with a roll of his eyes, to another house. An arrangement my family was forced to make to ensure a peaceful cooperation between my house and theirs. I had lived in this great house for years when I unexpectedly received a communication from my mother. It was her transferring as much of my house's wealth to me as she could and telling me to leave the principality seconds before she was decapitated in front of my eyes. There was a collective gasp among the four standing with him. Myra's eyes darkened while Ada's claws put fresh scratches on the side of her mug reflexively. Kartok stiffened, his posture going rigid. Even Amara didn't seem to know which emotion to process at once as her face flickered from furious to depressed. Nico cleared his throat before continuing. It wasn't long after that I found out my entire house had been massacred by the whims of a single woman, till all that was left was myself. Fortunately for me, the house I was imprisoned with had taken a liking to me over the years. Both not wanting to earn the ire of the assailant as well as taking pity on me, they very quietly smuggled me out of their territory. I met Myra on the way out. She had agreed to pilot me to safety. And the rest you all know. There are a few more details, of course, but I think you get the gist. So now we come to it, Nico continued, pushing off the table as his arms fell to his side. I'd like to take these assets, visit a few old enemies, and give them the same treatment we gave the Tegans on Volantis. With any luck, and considering how simple-minded these nobles seem to be, I think we might just be able to turn over one hell of a profit while doing it. Naturally, there is always a risk that something could go sideways. Since I want to do this for my own personal reasons, I want to make sure I still have your support. Myra pursed her lips from her position resting against the wall as she tried to keep her mind objective. Does the client know about this? Our employer currently thinks we are still working to acquire the assets, Nico admitted freely.
I can't keep that up for very long. Maybe another 2 to 3 days before I must report back in.
I floated the idea past them, but they refused to make a decision without the assets in hand first. Couldn't this cause problems if they find out we lied to them on the timetable? Kartok followed up. Before Nico could answer, Ada took a long, deep breath through her nose as her mind processed the information.
"Stop!" she yelled.
The thought of having one's whole family massacred and no answer ever given in response was something that stirred up the deepest embers of hell within her heart. It was a feeling that sat too close to home. And the fact that it happened to her captain, the one who had saved her from her horrible lot in life back on her home planet? Settling her eyes on her captain, her voice rumbled in a dangerous tone Nico himself had rarely heard.
"Why are we even talking about this?"
Either way, the client gets what they want. We get what we want.
And the Principality gets to receive some payback, what Nico wants.
Who cares if the client gets a little lie in between? They still get what they want.
How is this a bad thing?
The response brought a smile to her captain's face, even if he was surprised by the ferocity of her declaration. Amara, too, stood up a little taller.
"I'm with you, Captain."
"Let's go cause some mayhem," she finished with a playful bow. Nico turned toward Kartok with a sympathetic grin. "To your question, nothing I shouldn't be able to smooth over. So what say you?" Kartok finally allowed a smile to grace his features as he shrugged. "I've got nothing better to do." "Why not?" he said, hoping to also use the moment to make up for his earlier mistake. "Myra?" he asked after giving a nod. For her part, Myra flashed a playful, albeit small, grin. "I'm always with you, Captain. Just making sure the details get covered." "So, what's the job?" Nico smirked. "All right, here's the plan." Everyone leaned in a little closer.